Isn't that what they always do in the movies? They pop their gloves. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for coming back. It's motor time. It's time for me to kind of tell you what I found with the 350X teardown. It's not good. It's not good at all. It's bad. It's a lot of little things. I think the major things, you know, it was an oiling problem, and then that created a lot of destruction in its path. And each one of the systems kind of failed, and I was kind of wanted to go over that with you and kind of show you how I came to that determination. And then I'm going to kind of go into, we'll start rebuilding the engine. This video may be kind of long. I'll apologize ahead of time. You can skip around if you want, but I think it's good to understand why something failed, so you can kind of look out for it in the future, you know, on maybe your project. It doesn't have to be 350X, it can be any of these Hondas really. This is an oiling problem, probably from neglect. And in a nutshell, I think the previous owner, this guy built this engine, and I don't think he ever flushed or changed the oil after he built it. That's my guess. And the reason I come up with that is because the oil screen, the screen in the bottom of the case, I don't think he ever changed it. I don't think he ever cleaned it, and it was completely packed. There was no way there was any oil coming through that. I'll show you a picture of it. That being said, what we do have is, I believe that the oil screen was completely covered, just crud covered. There was no oil passing through that at all. So I believe the pump starved, sending oil to the top. Remember, this particular engine, the 350X, the 250ES, and either the 250SX, the same thing, is they have an external oil line that actually carries oil to the top of the engine, and then gravity brings it back down through the engine. That being said, if we start at the bottom where the sump is, if you will, the screen's completely filled up. That starved the pickup, that starved the oil pump. The oil pump didn't have any oil to take to the top of the engine, and that created our first casualty, which is the cam. If you look really close on the cam, as I turn it, you're gonna see a hot spot, and that's on the ramp side, or the ramp up side of both lobes. You see how the discolorization, it's not just that the oil got hot, it's that these components got starved for oil, and then therefore they showed a lot of wear prematurely. I mean, it's just a mess. So that's the cam, that's at the top of the engine. Luckily, our head looks fine. There's nothing really wrong with the head. Thinking back on when I bought this bike, I rode it at the test drive, and it ran fine and cranked up fine. And I'd ridden it probably 2 or 3 times since then. That's all the runtime that I know of for factors on this motors when I rode it. Now, the guy told me he just rebuilt it. How much runtime from the time he rebuilt it to the time he sold it, I don't know. And there's no way to know. So I'm gonna have to assume that it was relatively soon after the rebuild. Maybe he just kind of threw something together to sell it, and then I came along, and that's fine. You know, that's water under the bridge at this point. But that's our first casualty. So I think the cam got hot. I think it was just, I don't want to reuse it. We've got another cam. We're going to be using a cam out of a 350XD, which is a 4-wheeler. Now, I'm told that the grind on that is a little bit different. It's a little more torque, not as much RPM, you know, top end, which is fine by me. I'm you know, my racing days are pretty much over, but I do like the torque. I do like coming out of the hole on a 4-stroke. That's a positive thing. So I'm fine with that. 4-wheeler cam will go in your 350X 3-wheeler if you need a cam. So that's just something, you know, a little food for thought there. So working down through the engine, working back down to the piston, we found that our piston had wiped out all the rings. If you look really, really close, the ring should protrude out past the piston. This is why we didn't have any compression. All right, now if you'll notice, your engine builders out there, and they're here, okay, little asterisk, I am not an engine builder. I'm not pretending to be one. I'm gonna tell you what I think. I'm gonna show you how I do it. We'll let the chips fall where they may. I'll do the best I can. The top ring's missing on this. Somebody's already picked up on that, and you're already topping, so stop. I've got it over here to show you something separately. The rings were completely wore out. They've collapsed. This is what a collapsed ring looks like. The rings have been squeezed in. They've gotten really, really hot. They've lost their spring steel, their ability to spring back into place. They've lost that. Basically, they've been heat treated. They've gotten really, really hot. Once they got hot, they lost that spring steel, they compressed, and then they stuck and they stayed. Now, some guys will say they can put transmission fluid in, they can rev the engine up and free them, and that may be so, but if your engine won't start to begin with, you can't do that. So as you see, we basically wiped out a brand new set of rings. Now, looking a little closer to this, if you look really, really close, where's it at here? And it is small, it's not much right here. If you look right there on that head, just in front of my finger, you'll see that the valve came in contact with the top of the piston, but just enough to mar it. I'm trying to turn it so you can see it in the light. I mean, you probably could have reused this piston, but for the cost of a piston these days, I felt that it was just cheap insurance not to. So we're not going to use the piston, we're not going to use the rings. Look at the wrist pin. See that black line all the way around the wrist pin? All right, again, it's got starved for oil and it got hot. Let's keep in mind this thing's got at least 3 or 4 runs on it, that's it. That is a whole lot of wear for 3 or 4 runs. All right, so that's good to know. Piston shot, wrist pin shot, piston rings are shot. All right, we go back down through the engine and we look at our cylinder. Now our cylinder actually looked really good, and that's because the steel of the cylinder is the strongest component here. We were able to have this honed, and here's how I got to that determination. I was gonna buy a hone. Y'all seen me hone before, and then I could hone other motors, and that was fine, but for what the machinist charged me to hone this, I couldn't buy a hone. He charged me 20 bucks. He charged me 20 bucks, but he gave me a life lesson that hopefully I'm gonna pass on to y'all as well, worth more than 20 bucks. He honed the cylinder, and together he and I went through the components that I took him, and he helped me kind of build the story. And when you tear down an engine that's failed, even if it's just failed from years and years of use, it tells you a story if you know what to look for. A lot of this I didn't know. He taught me a lot, and that's well worth the 20 bucks I paid him. So the cylinder now has been honed, and I've got it sitting, it's all in grease. Okay, and that's just axle grease, and I just did that because it's been 3 weeks since I tore it down and since this was home. I don't like to leave anything raw metal out. This is Florida. It could rain tonight, it could snow tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen. The condensation here is wicked, and so rust is always our big enemy here in the South. But what we did is I pulled the top ring off the piston like I told you, and here's the top ring. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out what the ring gap was, and that's gap is just as it sounds, is the distance between the ring open and the ring closed, but not here in my hand. It needs to be in the cylinder. So what we did is we take the ring, and I'll just kind of show you quickly how we do this. We take the ring and we set it down inside the cylinder. Now remember, the cylinder's been honed, but a hone does not remove a lot of material. This is the piston that came out of the cylinder. I'm just going to use it quickly to just kind of square up the ring. Now if you look close, you see our ring here is now in the cylinder. And measure the gap with the ring in the cylinder is what gives you your ring gap. Now this engine should have had a minimum of 13 thousandths ring gap. We checked together this particular ring, it was 22 thousandths ring gap. Way too much. When you buy your pistons, and they'll come with rings more than likely, and they will have an instruction sheet in there and will tell you how to figure your ring gap for that particular manufacturer, and it will even give you some options. But it will tell you how to back figure this based on the bore of your engine and how many thousandths of ring gap you need. And we needed 13 thousandths, which is also what the book specs from Honda. Get your manual, download it at oscarmayer.com. I'll put a link in the description. I'll probably even put it on the screen. But always get a manual for your bike. Whatever bike you own, get the manual. It will save you thousands and thousands of dollars and hours of time when you need to look up something specific like this. So that kind of told us again that it was an oiling problem, that this engine was starved for oil, and really it comes down to poor maintenance, and that's a shame because the guy that built this is a Wesco or a Wiseco piston, It wasn't cheap. It's a 10.25 piston. It's a nice part. He put a nice part in it. When we first tore this down, I took some rough measurements, and I made the statement that the piston was the wrong size. And that's wrong on my account. It's something I learned. And the reason that I came up with that, and I'll explain how I got to it because I don't want to pass out, the wrong information. These pistons actually got a model number, and they're etched right across the top. Now yours may be different, but this is the way this particular Wiseco piston is. I gave this number to Wiseco. They told me exactly what it was. It's an 82 millimeter piston, which is a second overbore for this engine. This engine should have came with an 81 millimeter piston. The first overbore is 81 and a half. This is an 82 millimeter piston. I had the machinist double check my figures. He checked this cylinder and it was perfect for the 82 millimeter piston. But he told me, he said, you're just on the verge of having to rebore it again, which means in this case, you would have to put a sleeve in it. You can't bore it no more, is what he's trying to tell me. So in the event that that happened, if he'd have said that we couldn't bore it again, I would have had two options. We could have either got a new sleeve and had pressed in this cylinder, which is a possibility, not cheap, or we could have bought another head off of something else. Now that we know a few things, we know that this cylinder is the same as a 350D. So that opens up your possibilities there. If you can find 350D parts, you can fix your 350X. So that's good to know. Head gasket was fine. When we did a whole video on will it run, and the answer to that question, no, it would not run. And my leg is still a little sore and mad at me for it. But I thought maybe it was a head gasket. I tore it down thinking, well, hey, maybe it's the head gasket. Well, the head gasket was fine, and he used a quality head gasket. There's nothing wrong with this head gasket. We are not going to reuse it, but I just wanted to show it to you that it was intact. It doesn't have any blowed out areas. Everything looks good. I couldn't find anything wrong with the head gasket. So that leads us to the head. Now the head was pretty interesting. When I tore the head down, I've cleaned it up. It's been a week of cleaning. With engines, I clean and clean and clean and clean. You got to be clean putting an engine together. Any dirt that gets in there is going to probably stay in there. It's going to cause you trouble down the road. So always keep a clean area. I'm going to clean this up again before I start the build. This is just kind of the introduction to this video and to kind of tell you what we found. What I found on the head was, again, remember this piston, we talked about it, this piston came in contact with something. Now I can only go by what's in front of me. I can't speak on the previous guy, what the engine was like when he rebuilt it. I don't know. So going with what I had, I found that both intake valves, the seat where the valve sits, should have had a nice clean wear line all the way around it. The exhaust valves had a perfect circle around both of them where the exhaust valve would retract up into the head and would make a nice meeting surface. Both intake valves did not have that. They were very light. The wear area was not prominent. It was not proud. They weren't sealing is what I'm trying to tell you. And that's either, and I'm hoping, and we're going to roll the dice on this, y'all. I think the valve had a slight bend to it, and I think the valve was spinning, and therefore it wasn't making a constant connection all the way around. I think that valve, one of them definitely hit the head. I think both of them were a little bent. So you're going to see me install brand new valves. Shindy makes a valve. That's a Japanese company, highly respected in parts is Shindy, S-H-I-N-D-Y. There'll be a link in the description if you need them. Went ahead. If you're going to do this, and this is a bike I'm going to keep. This is not a flip bike. This is not something that I'm going to get rid of tomorrow or anything like that. So I'm going to spend a little money maybe that I wouldn't necessarily spend. You do what you got to do, and we all find ourselves in. But at some point in time, you got to draw a line. You got to draw a line and say, look, okay, I'm not made of money, and I can't put $1,000 into this rebuild. It's just not worth that to me. So. That being said, I'll just go ahead and tell you, you may see me do some things that you don't agree with, and if you want to do it different on your engine, great. I'm going to do it this way because this is my engine, this is my budget, and this is what I'm comfortable doing. Yeah, it would have been nice to have split in the case and replaced everything in there and started over. I didn't do that. I did not want to split the case. I'm not going to hide anything from you. I didn't split the case. What I did do was a diesel bath, and it's been draining for a week. And that's clean it, run it through all the gears, you know, cycle the crank, spray it down, flush it out, let it drain, drip dry, do it again. So we've done that 3 times. Now this oil is a little thin. I've put some gasoline in here and diesel from washing the engine down, but it was a mess, y'all. It was a real mess. And why it was that way, all I can think of is that screen was not clean ever. And in the rebuilding the engine, there was materials left in there. It was not clean when he did the rebuild. All of the new stuff moving around, there was a lot of RVT on this engine, RTV on this engine, excuse me. I get that backwards every time. I'm dyslexic. If any of y'all are dyslexic, don't worry about it. Just figure a way to remember it. And so it's room temperature vulcanization, RTV. And one of y'all told me what that was, and I appreciate it and I remember it, but as you see, I still get it wrong. So if you are dyslexic, don't worry about it. You got a special talent somewhere else, you just got to find it, and it ain't spelling. So that's okay. It's not that big a deal. Nowadays, are you kidding me? We got spell check on your phones, your computers, the internet. You can't use Google without it correcting you. Yeah, it's a mess. But it's a good thing. It's something we didn't have as a kid. And if you were like me, getting C's and D's and F's and spelling, now you know why, is you're dyslexic. They didn't know what that was back then. Yeah, it ain't your fault. It's just the way you are. So anyways, engine building. I'm glad we tore it down. It was the right thing to do. It wasn't going to run no way. It didn't really have much other choice. We spent the whole Saturday trying to figure out why it didn't run. But as for new parts, we got a new timing chain. If you're going to tear one down this far, go ahead and put a timing chain in it. They're like 20 or 30 bucks. It's not that big a deal. The biggest issue is you got to tear that right side of the case off to get to it. And then that means you got to tear off a bunch of other stuff like the oil pump and the clutch and all that kind of stuff. But it's well worth doing. It's not that hard of a job. And I just wanted to take a moment to kind of show you and tell you what was wrong with it. Nothing else really, and I know that was a lot of stuff. Everything else seemed to look pretty good. All the bearings in the case feel really good. The crank spins really good. I didn't find any play. There was some temperature. You could tell it got hot. The motor did get hot at some point in time, but the rod bearing seems fine. There's no up and down play in it. We're replacing the wrist pin, so that's good. That was the only one that really looked bad, and it was hard. I actually had to beat this wrist pin out. It didn't really want to slide out like it was supposed to. I hope, and this is something that I haven't found the answer to yet, I hope this wrist pin was so hard coming out, I hope this contributed to why that bike was so hard to kick over. That's what I'm praying for. I'm thinking that the piston was getting in a bind as I was trying to kick it, and that's what would cause the kicker to hang up, because I couldn't press this pin out, you know, just with my fingers like I should have been able to. I'm thinking that the piston was doing this inside the cylinder. It had enough walk in it, so they call it piston walk. Have you ever heard of that? It's more of a 2-stroke term, but when you're wore out this bad in a 4-stroke, you get it here too. If that piston was getting in a bind or walking front to back inside that cylinder, it could have actually hung up. And that could have been certainly enough to cause resistance on the kicker. That's why this bike hopefully was so hard to kick. We're gonna find out. I'm gonna roll the dice. If this wasn't the case, then what does that mean? Well, that means tearing it down and probably sending it out to somebody else. Somebody that's more knowledgeable than me. I got somebody in mind. But that would mean it's probably a transmission kicker problem. When you go to buy a lapping compound, don't ask for lapping compound. They won't know what you're asking for. Yeah, it took me 20 minutes and like a whole, Google thing to figure out what lapping compound was. They call it valve grinding compound at your local parts store. Those people don't know what lapping compound is. So maybe that's a southern thing. We call it lapping compound. They didn't know what I was asking for. We figured it out, and I appreciate the help. That's lapping the valves kind of down and dirty, you know. Yeah, 3-angle valve job and 4-angle valve job and all these kinds of things, they all require special equipment. If you're going to try to do this at home, this is about the good as you're going to get. They make a little hand lapping tool. I like the drill. A couple reasons. One, it's a lot easier, but I think it's more consistent. And if you watch me, I plunge and I try to count how many times I plunge going clockwise. I change the direction of the drill and I do the same number, which is generally 5 for me. I have 5 clockwise, 5 counterclockwise, and then I do it again clockwise and 5 counterclockwise, and then I check it. These actually cleaned up really well. They left a good mark right out of the gate. And the reason they did is because I started with brand new valves. Now, here's how I like to think of it. When you're dealing with an old engine, you have a seat and a valve, and they both are going to wear, and they're going to wear at different rates, but they're both wearing, okay? Even if you were to tear this down, clean it, you would still want to relap the valves, and you'd want to put them back in the same hole. But if you're putting valve stems in here, you've already got the valves out, go ahead and lap them. Make sure you don't have any rusted, pitted areas, any blow through, any burn through. You can burn a little nick right in the edge of a valve, and that causes, you know, a leak of compression. You can burn a seat. I had a 350 Honda come in, the guy sunk it. Motor was hot, goes right in the creek, sinks it, takes on water, literally blew the seat right out of the valve. I'd never seen anything like it. That bike had 0 compression. Another reason why I always recommend y'all do a compression test before you really start diving into what's wrong with an engine. That engine, everything worked on it except it had 0 compression. And that's why the seat was blowed out of it, and so it was never going to make any compression. Basically a hole in the head. Now, when you do what I do, when you start with the new valves, now the seat's worn and the valve is not 0. So you still want to lap those, because basically what you want to do is now the valve seat has been used to being run in the lower part of the seat, okay? Because that old valve is worn and it's set a little deeper into that valley. Now you put in a new valve, it sits a little proud. So you want to make sure you can get that valve to match up with that face of that seat, so you have a good seal. So that's reassembly on the head. Pretty straightforward. It's not a lot to it. The most important thing is to go slow and be careful. I do use a spring compressor. You pretty much got to have something like this. You can pick this up on Amazon. There'll be a link in the description. It's like 30 bucks. It's really not a big deal. If you plan on doing your own engine work, it's a must-have. It really is. It's just like a compression tester is a must-have for diagnosing, and that goes across the board. This is not just you know, kind of a motorcycle only. This is small engines across the board. These come in 2 different sizes. You can get a small engine motorcycle one like this, or you can get a bigger heavy duty one for automotive. Okay, so what we have here, and I know some of y'all are already typing, so stop. That is not bleach and that's not cleaner. I have diesel fuel in a spray bottle. Okay, so this is diesel fuel. And so it's great for cleaning. It cuts through grease. It has a lubricant in it, so your parts aren't going to rust up overnight. You know, if you cleaned them and didn't put anything else on them, they won't rust because the diesel has the oil in it. What I'm doing is I'm checking for leaks. You saw me hit the back of the spring, the back of the valve with the rubber mallet. Not hard, but you just want to hear it, basically the valve go in and then clack back, go in and clack back. That way you know it's functioning. You want to make sure that those two retaining clips are seated properly. They're not going to pop out on you and go shooting across the floor, because you won't find them. They are really, really small. When I use the clamp, I clamp underneath my table. That way the head's locked down. It's locked down to the table. It's not going to move. And when I'm fiddling with those little retaining clips, I have at least peace of mind knowing that everything is secure in one spot. Now, I'm probably going to move this head to the side so I can keep working on other things. But as you see, I've been rambling on here about a minute or so. Our fluid level still stays the same. We don't have any leaks pouring out of our exhaust or our intake side of the head. Our spark plug, y'all saw me fiddle with it, and I'm going to tell you, somebody's put a helicoil in here. If you don't know what a helicoil is, helicoils, somebody stripped out the spark plugs. What's happened? Sorry. Somebody stripped out the spark plug, and probably that person came back with a helicoil. And what they ended up doing, and who knows, a helicoil is literally a spring that is the same size and diameter as whatever you're trying to fix. You can get them in different sizes. And that helicoil, that spring is spiral wound, of course, and you screw it into the hole. Generally, you would drill your hole out to the next size, and then you would, once you had it drilled, hopefully they took it off the bike, but who knows. Once you drill it, then you take that helicoil, and it comes with a little tool, and you corkscrew that spring into your hole. And then once you get it in place, you seat it by breaking the bottom out of it, and that's a little tab, a little tang that sticks off. You notice me, I kind of messed with this one a little bit when the head was upside down. I didn't know this head had that. Things you find, things you learn. It's the only repair when you strip a spark plug out is a helicoil. And so the idea thing is to take the head off. Now, I know that's a lot of work on a lot of bikes. Some bikes that would mean take the engine out. I know some of y'all are going to say, well, you can use a vacuum. Yes, you can. If, and I'll just kind of give you an overview of this. Ideally, is you would take the engine, you would roll it up to TDC, so the piston's all the way at the top. You drill, and then you vacuum, and then you bore scope, and then you vacuum some more, and you bore scope some more, and you vacuum some more, and you make sure you get every single bit of those filings out of that engine. Okay? I've only had to use a couple, and that's a good thing, because I really don't like them, but sometimes it's the only thing to do. Only reason I do this is to check for a leak. And so right now, our springs are holding good, our valves are seated good. I don't see any leaks whatsoever anywhere. I mean, this is really good. as y'all can see, there's no engine in the frame. Y'all just watch me rebuild this engine and put it in the frame, check for oiling, and then what happened? Well, what happened was I still couldn't kick it over. The kicking problem still plagued this engine, even though I had done a whole new top end on it. Went through the clutch, went through visually looking at everything externally of the case. Behind cameras, once that happened, I knew there was no reason to go forward, and pulled the motor back out and I tore it down. I ordered a case splitter. I split that case, and I was actually able to come up with another engine, another 85 350X, and split that case, and then sat there and compared each engine side by side. And that's what the next video is going to be about. It's going to be about a little bit of comparison, but it's mostly going to be rebuilding, kind of a Frankenstein, if you will. We're going to take the best components of both engines, build one engine out of it, and stick back in this bike. We're going to end up, and I hope, I've isolated the problem to be between the clutch and really the transmission. That's got to be where the problem lays, because I've isolated the kicker assembly, I've isolated the crank rods and piston, and none of those components have anything to do with why it's hard to kick over. The problem has to be in the transmission. So what I'm going to do is we're going to not use my transmission, my kicker assembly, because that's kind of all one component. And we're going to transfer over the clutch, the rods, the bearings of my case into this new to me case, and we're going to build that engine up, and that's what the next video is going to be about. So there you go. That's the update on 350X. This is the new workspace for the next month or so until we get through the heat of summer. I'm excited about it. It's going to be hard to go back out there and give up air conditioning. Luckily, we've got some really good lighting out here in the garage, and we'll see what the next project brings. Thank y'all so much for watching. I appreciate it. Y'all like, share, and subscribe. Have a good day.